This is Art 490, Art of the Baroque, and we're here focusing on Caravaggio. This is the second half of the pair of videos on Italian Baroque painting. The first one was on Carracci. This is a still life with a basket of fruit, painted by Caravaggio very early in his career. His name, Caravaggio, comes from the name of the town he's from in Lombardy in northwestern Italy near Milan. The style of painting there, being in North Italy and close to northern Europe, there's an emphasis on lots of surface detail. Many of the paintings, as we saw in the Northern Renaissance art, there was a premium on artists who could observe nature and demonstrate that they could, paint all the different kinds of surface textures and represent reality. And Caravaggio came from that tradition. And when he moved to Rome uh, to start his career there in his early 20s, he went into the style of painting that was there was like the Carracci style, that is the academic style. And to understand the difference between Caravaggio and he sort of created kind of a revolution there in Rome with his style. You have to understand how the academic style worked. It was very laborious. It started with a long uh, apprenticeship. Uh, Students were started very young, teaching them drawing the anatomy, how to do perspective, all the technical things you need to know to be an artist. And you would uh, all of this study and work went into creating a kind of an artificial world, as I described in the Carracci style before, where things are idealized to a extreme extent, and the figures look like they're made up figures, imaginary figures, poses, and lighting. All of it is uh, you could call it a realism, but it's as if the world that you imagined as a perfect world were real and you were painting it exactly as it is. And that's a different approach to what Caravaggio did. He didn't do drawings. He didn't do all sorts of preparatory studies for compositions. In fact, I don't think there are any drawings by him that are definitely by him. His process was to work directly on the canvas, just to look at an actual uh, still life, in this case, a basket of fruit, or you have props with sitters. And you would have people, his friends, either other painters that he knew would pose for him, or he would get homeless people or people from taverns or anybody, friends that he could get to sit for him. So uh, he would always have a model to look at, and he would paint directly on the canvas without any preparation. And he was very good at that. He could just look at a thing and paint it directly. And he still has the polish, smoothness, wiping out all the brush strokes so that you don't, so that everything looks real. But it also has a different kind of realism that what you think of as the Carracci realism. Because in the Carracci realism, they may the Carracci and all of his followers, they may look at real objects and how light falls on them and all the textures and colors that they present. And they would put those in a picture, but the picture as a whole would be an artificial work of the imagination. Whereas Caravaggio's style involved setting everything up in front of him and painting exactly the way it was without any idealization. If there's any flaws, he would paint the flaws. So that's uh, the big contrast, and it's exhibited here in this first painting that we're looking at. It's the still life with basket of fruit. Um, it looks, for all the world, like a photograph. When we look close at it, you see that there's all sorts of little imperfections, like a little bug bite here. Um, I've read something by a horticulturalist who, um, identified the kind of bug that would make exactly that mark. All these little uh, imperfections, things on the leaves, on the fruit, are all recorded exactly as they are, to the point where it's as if you had a photograph from the real basket of fruit that existed in the late 1590s. It's an extraordinary piece of work. One, in that uh, the style at the time was to paint things um, perfect. So if Caravaggio had ever occasion to paint a basket of fruit, he would not put the spot on the apple. He would make everything look nice and clean and perfect, and he would compose it perfectly in some sort of geometric composition. But let's look at this composition. Um, One thing we notice is that this leaf here creates a kind of a right angle corner, as does this one here, and this one here. So if you were to draw a box, you have a rectangle, you know, lines up with the bottom of the top of the basket right there. That makes a nice kind of rectangle, and notice that it's the same rectangle. We look, zoom out. It's a very similar rectangle to the whole rectangle. Um, Other things like that, like this angle here creates a nice uh, equilateral triangle that it's sitting on. Um, Look at just the figure ground problem you get with the positive negative interplay in this silhouette of a leaf. This fig leaf here, and also this silhouette here, creates a nice uh, negative shape. Notice that it's dark on light on this side and light on dark on the other side. Not exactly dark, but it's got a different level of contrast here. He's dealing with interesting lighting situations. This is almost like a scientific study, but it's something that's used to demonstrate his ability to paint, so that he could use this to get commissions. But this emphasis on the imperfections, the wilted leaf, or the fact that these leaves happen to be in shadow, so you don't see them, or at least the light is not directly on them, so you don't see all the detail. But when he wants to put detail, he'll put detail, even down to, say, the little drops of water and the gleam of the drop of water on a thing, so that a botanist could tell exactly what the leaf is, what caused that particular kind of rot, or you know fungus, or whatever happens to be on the leaf. It's all scientifically recorded. Look at how it looks like the light is going through the grapes and is sort of refracting uh, through the grape to create a little bit extra highlight here within the shadow, because light is going through. Also, look at something that you don't get to see in almost any painting, is that he's painted the negative shape. Notice that there's brush strokes within the negative shape, as if instead of just creating a background first and then painting on top of a background. You can see it here. You can see that the brush strokes are taking into account the positive shape, so that the background was painted afterwards. And like he's thinking of these as shapes, he's painting the shapes that are negative, which makes them look, in this case, like positive shapes, which has the effect of making the negative shapes pop out as positive shapes. Interesting interplay of stuff going on. And of course, he has, uh, a grasp of the way light falls over every single object, and is able to capture it in a remarkably photographic look. And I'm not sure that other artists couldn't have done this, like Caravaggio, and who also attempted to do things similar to Caravaggio in terms of realism. But Caravaggio seems to surpass them. That is, you can recognize them as being of a different quality. And one uh, possible explanation is that he used some sort of optical device. Uh, uh, there are ways that you can use mirrors and lenses and things uh, to get the locations of things on a canvas in such a way that you get everything exactly right in proportion to one another. But getting the tonal qualities and the color is not nearly as easy to do with any kind of mechanical device, and that's the sort of thing that you just have to see. And apparently that was his particular genius, was being able to grasp exactly how something looks. This is another of his early pictures. Once he had in Rome, he got commissions from a group of patrons who were art collectors, who were just looking for good artists who had the ability to do something interesting, and they would commission him to do some things like this. He did lots of small pictures that were before he got into the large church pictures. Uh, but this is called a Bacchus, where you see the figure of it looks like a person, like a model. Like actually, it's one of his friends who's identified. They know his name, but he's sitting for a portrait. He looks like an actual person holding a glass of wine here, and there's another basket of fruit here that looks even more flawed than the one before, filled with things that are figs that are splitting open, and the you know this the peach or whatever this is also kind of rotten and uh, overripe, at least shriveled up leaves and stuff. There's even dirt under the fingernails of the sitter here, or perhaps it's paint, since the sitter was a friend of his who was an artist. But he's showing off his ability to do realism, and this kind of thing was just a new thing for Rome, for the patrons of art. They had never seen this kind of look, because if you imagine Carracci and the kind of people who were doing a neo-Renaissance look in the Baroque, um, if they were to approach a subject like this, the image of Bacchus would look like an idealized person, an artificial person. If you think of the Farnese Gallery, there is a picture of Bacchus in there, and he just looks like any other classical figure, uh, and you just know from context who the character is. But here, uh, Caravaggio is imbuing this sitter with qualities that you think of as an individual, as a specific person, and that these are specific grapes and fruit and leaves and a specific glass of wine, and because of this realism, you get a notion that there's a kind of a psychological profile is going on, that because it's a specific person, that the qualities that this person has is the quality of the character that he's playing. For example, he's got notice his face is kind of blushed and red or tanned, whereas his body here, all the way down to his wrist, is very white, like a person who spends their time outside, uh, wearing a garment that covers up most of them, but the part that's exposed to the sun gets a little bit tanned, the hands here and the face. Yet when he's undressed here in this portrait, uh, you see that difference, and the artist has painted the fact that there's an edge to his tan here, there's an edge right here, because that's exactly what the model had. And the way he's looking at you, it has a um, it's like a specific person speaking to you. Like you can tell that it's an individual rather than an idealized version of a person. And that approach of painting, of telling a story by using realism, was just fresh and new in Rome, and there was a group of patrons who wanted this sort of thing, and eventually he started getting big commissions, uh, like this one, the Calling of Saint Matthew, for a church in Rome. It's part of a chapel, and uh, there were a pair of them. The martyrdom of Saint Matthew was, I think, on the other side. But this is an example of him telling a story. In this case, is a religious story, using a group of figures, and it's in a very complex composition. His earlier ones were all like single figures, simple sort of thing. He was working out how he was going to do his realism, because he had a supply of props. He saw a supply of people who would sit for him, and he had some sort of technique. I don't know what it was, but to get images onto a canvas in a very, something approaching a photographic way. And he also had just a completely new approach to how to make a picture that wasn't studied. It wasn't part of the academic tradition. And so what's going to go on with Caravaggio is that over the course of just a very few years, he worked from just like 1590, say, or just maybe 1595 to 1610. Just a very short career, and then he died young. And he had his influence was mostly on the young artists at the time. The older artists, the people who had been through the academic tradition, who had been studied and apprenticeships and knew how to do the drawing and all the process of complex compositions you have to work out. Those people, a lot of them rejected him, and they even criticized the fact that he didn't draw, or they had these odd compositions. They'd criticize the fact that things were too real. That is, without any kind of idealization, he would any flaw that he would paint, they would criticize that sort of thing. But there were some patrons like that, and some didn't, and a few patrons liked both, and they commissioned both. If you recall the chapel that we saw at the beginning of the last one, the patrons for this picked both the Carracci style and the Caravaggio style. So, because they both had their use in the Baroque, because in the Baroque, much of what affected the art, especially in churches, was the Council of Trent, and in that, one of the things that came out of that in terms of how artists were, the church's position on how artists were to make art. One of the characteristics was that things be relatable, and if you're a peasant, if you're somebody who of the lower classes, uneducated sort of workers, the sort of people that the church was looking to proselytize to, that having pictures that they could relate to in some way. So having pictures that the people in the pictures are wearing clothes that you recognize from the street. They have faces that look like the ordinary faces you might see. In fact, because these are pictures of people, apparently they're a portrait of actual people that Caravaggio knew. His audience might even recognize specific people as normal people that you would see, especially in a picture like this. This is the Calling of St. Matthew, with Christ is here and St. Peter, and this group of people here. Anyone looking would recognize this as the kind of clothes of the sort of people that Caravaggio hung around with. This is the kind of person like an armed guard, like somebody who's a ruffian, the kind of punks that would go around with swords and pick fights with people, uh, and the kind of flamboyant dress that they would have, feathers in their hats and such. And then the man here playing Matthew, pointing to himself and saying, "Who, me?" As Christ is choosing him, and the other people here with their, he was a tax collector before he was chosen to be one of the disciples. So here he is at a table with people counting money. So this sort of thing, the reality of this is so strong that anyone looking at it would see this as something that actually happened. That this is um, it's as if you took people off the street, put them in costume, and they're playing the part, and we're seeing exactly what that would look like without any kind of idealization. There are no Greco-Roman faces in this. There's just um, the scene as you can imagine that it would really have looked like, assuming that when it really happened, people were wearing the dress of the early 1600s. Even the place, uh, uh, with light coming in here, uh, and this window here, this is exactly the sort of thing that a person would recognize as being, the sort of place like a tavern in Rome. It probably has parchment as windows here to sort of filter the light as it come in. Um, the light that's coming here, this beam, is a matter of the position that this painting is in the chapel is such that the the wall that is perpendicular on this side has this window in it at this height, so that light from the window appears in the painting as illuminating the part of the painting. And that we get to another aspect of Caravaggio that is, the big thing, that's in contrast to the studied academic tradition, is tenebrism, also called chiaroscuro. Chiaroscuro is just Italian for the words light and dark, and uh, this it could be used. The word chiaroscuro is often used, especially in the early Renaissance, to contrast the style of painting then to the previous style, the medieval style, which is flat and patterned. And so when you start having people paint pictures where figures have a light side and a dark side, and that creates modeling so that it looks like a three-dimensional shape, chiaroscuro is used for that. But this is going much farther beyond simply light and dark. This is a matter of where the backgrounds of the pictures are so dark, it's just black often, and the blackness often takes a large percentage of the surface area, and that the forms are illuminated by some sort of spotlight, usually something from the outside of the picture. At least in Caravaggio's, the source of light is usually outside, coming in and raking across the forms, causing the forms to sort of emerge from this darkness. Especially looking at the figure of Christ, you don't see anything hardly at all. It's just his face here, a little bit of his halo, which is a tiny little ring here. This is as discreet as it can be in his hand. Like the artist is using the light as a way to pick out the things he wants to show, and using the darkness to hide the things that aren't necessary. You can see Christ's other hand here is so much in the dark, it almost gets lost. And his foot back there, and his other foot, but his figure, obscured by Peter here, is just lost in the dark. Whatever he's wearing here over his shoulder just blends seamlessly into the darkness. And the figures here also have areas where dark parts of the figures blend into the background, so that it's hard to find the edges of things. Now, in the academic tradition, the edges of things are important. They're part of the composition, that they want you to be able to see the line all the way around it, because they tend to be much more linear. The emphasis is on lines and edges of things. Here, edges get distorted, or they get obscured, or they just get lost in one thing, like just the sleeve against that. Things blend together into a pattern that sort of goes into a kind of a chaos where you don't see where one thing ends and another thing begins, so as to give a a unity over the surface. So tenebrism is the term for this kind of chiaroscuro, where it's the more extreme version. Oftentimes, the light comes in and illuminates things where there's such a stark contrast between the light bit and the dark bit uh, that's usually where you see the term tenebrism. And not all of them have that. Like you can see the light on Peter's cloak here. You know, it's much brighter here, and it gets gradually a little bit lighter and lighter until it goes into the darkness down here. Other places, like the edge of Matthew's head is a very stark contrast between his edge of his head and the his hat that he's wearing, and that extra contrast is a thing that he's using to pick him out, to make you see just what he wants you to see. He wants you to he's 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 just using the light to show what he wants to be shown, what's visible and what's not visible. Notice the hand here, very similar to the hand of Adam in the creation of Adam. Also, this sword here is the sort of sword that Caravaggio would have carried himself, because he was one of these punks. He was a ruffian. He would go out and start fights with people and get into trouble a lot. There's a lot of police records and court cases that we have a record of everything that he did. He got arrested for. He was always in trouble, and eventually he had to flee Rome and take up a career again in Naples, and then he had a problem there, and he had to flee to Malta, and he trouble there, and he fled back. His original exile from Rome had to do with he killed somebody in a brawl over a tennis match, apparently, and he was the sort of person who was easily offended, or he would if someone said something that offended him, he would challenge them to a duel. So getting back to the this chapel, the Cerasi chapel, also in Rome. The other one was in Rome as well. And these two pictures, the picture on your list that you have is the one of Paul, but also there's the one of Peter, and they go as a pair. And they contrast greatly with the picture in the middle. I mean, this really illustrates the difference in the approaches of the two currents within the Baroque, of the academic tradition, the neo-Renaissance sort of tradition, and this new style that Caravaggio is bringing to Rome, and you can see that, you can imagine that the patrons looking at these styles, they want to have pictures that do satisfy the terms of the Council of Trent, in terms of what the church wanted for the artwork to do. They wanted to inspire, wanted to have pictures that the people could relate to, and the pretty colors and the majesty and the idealism of this is appropriate for its subject. But for these two subjects, the earthy, grittier realism of Caravaggio is doing the trick. And both of them have things that you can relate to. The Mary here moving, look, she seems to be flying almost like an airplane into our space. And Paul here is fallen into our space. And, there's the diagonal here of the cross, and the backside of this person pushing the cross up is coming into our space, so that it's as if a real thing that you see as actual reality is happening, and that the event of Paul and his conversion, or the event of Peter and his crucifixion, are things that really happened. You don't have to imagine them in some sort of imaginative world that the Carracci's invented. You get to see Caravaggio's vision of it, uh, where things look real. Paul was converted. His name was Saul, and he was a persecutor of the early Christians. And he was on his way to Damascus on his horse, and he was knocked off his horse by a bright light, and it blinded him. And uh, God told him, to turn around, and uh, and so this is an image of that event. It has, for a large portion of the canvas, is taken up with his horse, and there's a groom or some person holding the horse, who doesn't seem to be even aware of what's going on, and Paul lying on the ground. He's wearing kind of a Roman uh, outfit, probably some props that Caravaggio had on hand. There's his sword again. Um, he's lying on his back in this really odd position, like you would never imagine um, a Renaissance painter having a figure in this pose, having the main subject in this position, at the bottom of the picture. If you see, when you're standing, he's actually uh, in your space. He's right here where you are. I mean, you are about your head height is where his head is. Um, and this is so awkward, but it's the kind of awkwardness that comes when something is real. The real world is awkward. It's not, doesn't have the artificial, um, painstakingly composed version uh, of the Carracci's or the academic tradition. The one one way to see this, why is he spending so much of the surface, the area, on this horse? Um, One is he needs to, because he has this style of tenebrism where you have objects that are merging from the darkness. He needs something here, um, to to represent the light. In order to see light, it has to hit something. You can't see light when it's just going through darkness, not hitting anything. And so the purpose of the horse is just to give you something that is being illuminated by this light, which is the subject of the picture. The subject of the story is the light from God, is illuminating him physically, literally, but also spiritually. So he's giving you something to look at that is being illuminated, uh, and that is the whole point of it. And he also takes into account the fact that he's showing off the fact that he can render the horse accurately, but it's accurate in the kind of a way that's not a ideal version of a horse. I don't know how uh, the academic tradition of learning how to draw horses is, but you probably don't draw them from this pose, where you see their rump as the main thing, but probably seen from the side or from the front, or some sort of a heroic position, but just this uh, casually standing there in this pose is almost as if he just happened to be in this pose, uh, because it's real. There's also the fact that his leg is up here, and it's going to come down, and it's it might come down on his leg so that it would hurt. So there's a kind of a tension that comes from the pose of the horse, and that it's threatening him, and that the light of this part of the horse is like the light of God coming down on him, and he's got this this threat of this leg coming down. So that's all these things together gives you a huge psychological drama that's going on, and also a physical drama that's going on, and they're both happening at the same time, and one is reinforcing the other. Similarly, uh, the same sort of thing in its companion piece on the left side. Uh, this sort of awkward position. that Peter is in. But in the story, he is crucified upside down because he said he wasn't worthy to be crucified like Christ. And so is to show his humility. But this really weird awkwardness of having this figure, this main figure right in front, um, his only purpose is to show just how heavy this cross is and how much the difficulty of raising it. And you would think that, well, why would the difficulty of raising it be the subject of the picture? This guy is having to hold it, and this guy is pulling with this rope, and this guy is pushing up here, sticking his bottom right towards us and his dirty feet. All these things you wouldn't expect in any kind of. He's like he's going to polar opposite of what the academic tradition would have a take of this story. But by doing it this way, he's telling the story as if it's something that's actually happening and something that's real. It's happening right now, and the movement, the light, the grittiness, the dirt on the feet, the expression on his face, all of it, create this drama that that this is something that's actually happening. And you can also imagine when I use the word drama and also the theatricality, you can imagine there's different kinds of theaters and there's different kinds of ways that a production could be had. Like if you were going to have the Caravaggio, we're going to put on a play where they had a group of people dressed up so as to recreate this event. You could do it in a heroic way. You could do it in an idealized way. But if you were actually going to do it, to make it look like if you had say a cinematographer who wanted to show you exactly what it looked like, without reference to anything that is ideal, any kind of perfection, but just really what it looked like, then this is the way you go. So he enjoyed a bunch of success when he was in Rome with patrons, because of this. The tenebrism was new to most people. The realism was new, and this psychological drama that he had. And this is an example of Saint Jerome, for example. And when in his early days, he has brighter colors and not quite so dark as in his later period. He got even darker and dimmed the colors as his life became more and more difficult, tragic, and he was always in desperate circumstances. That he had these lots of personal problems going on. So a lot of times when he does two different versions of a thing, the earlier one is a little brighter, and then the later one is a little darker. And here's a good example is the Supper at Emmaus. In this one, he's telling a story from the New Testament where after the resurrection, his disciples and followers are all down, and on one occasion there's a couple of his followers are walking on the road to Emmaus, and they meet another, and they start talking about Christ, and as it turns out, at some point he reveals himself that it is Christ, and they are really surprised, and he disappears. So that's the story from the account from the New Testament. But Caravaggio wants to show you this story, and he does it in two different ways at two different times in his life. This is an earlier one, and this is a later one of the same event. That is the revelation, the moment when the two pilgrims, this one here and this one here, are realize that it's Christ, and Christ is here in the middle. The first one, has some of the qualities of his really early work. This is pretty early, where he's still showing off. He's like he has. Let's go back. He has the basket of fruit. Looks like the same basket that we saw before, but it's it's right on the edge of the table. In fact, it looks like it's about to fall off. It also has the spotted fruit, the less than ideal versions of the fruit. There's a chicken on the table. Looks like he's he really wants to show off his ability to show textures and surfaces and things. These are just extraneous details. The bread, the water, the glass. He wants to show you all that he can render all of these things. But what he's, his main thing that he's working on is this ability to show character and create a drama by faces and expressions and gestures. So Christ is here. His eyes, he's looking down, or his eyes are closed. But he has gestures as he's in the middle of telling a story. He's saying something, but he's sort of in a world on his own. And he has makes a little gesture with his hand here, and this other gesture like he's gesticulating as he's speaking. He's also a young, beardless Christ, which is kind of an unusual thing to do. And then he is contrasted against this old man who looks like a real person, like he's gone out and find somebody who has character in his face. He looks like a real person. And he's in the middle of gesticulating himself with his arms out, like he said, "Wait a minute," and he holds his arms out like actually it's like God in Michelangelo's Sistine Ceiling. There's an image of God with his hands sticking out left and right like this in a foreshortened manner. And then this man, who's sitting in a chair, but he's his eye, even from his lost profile, you see by the wrinkles in his forehead that his eyes are just opening. He's just realizing, and that he's about to stand up, putting his hands on his chair here, just about to stand up. So and then the tavern owner or wherever he is, the waiter is looking, and he doesn't know. He doesn't know yet. So you have the two people who are aware, and then Christ in the middle is the calm, and with the storm around him, and then this man who's not yet aware, and then you have a beam of light coming in from the left. All sorts of interesting things. This is a really complex picture. He's obviously showing off his ability to do all these textures and things, but these are kind of extraneous to it. There's an interesting little bit here with the edge of the chair. This arm of the chair is a straight horizontal line lining up with the line of the table. That's kind of neat because the chair itself is at an angle to the table, so only from this point of view do we see it as a straight line, but it helps unify this line, makes this flatter, so he doesn't look like he's so much into our space, but this elbow is pushing into our space, and this hand is pushing into our space, so as to create this drama, this flow that goes all the way around the table. Lots of interesting stuff that he has in his youthful phase. And later in life, things are not going so well for him. He takes on the drama again, and this time, he has almost the same ingredients. He's had one figure over here, but he's darkened everything so as to have this light pick out just the bits of things that he wants to show, and he has fewer things on the table, and he doesn't spend nearly as much attention on them. Like he's not showing off color or lots of textures. He's just a few objects. And he uses this light to pick out just a much more subtle gesture in Christ. And the figure here, that he's really surprised, but you can't see his face at all. You only see it in these hands. And this hand is almost completely obliterated by being against a dark background, dark against dark. So you don't even see it hardly. Just this hand really is enough. And you see it in proximity to Christ's hand, the one that is aware, right next to this one. And this, instead of having the guy on the right, instead of having his arms shooting out in an action, he's holding the table, he's gripping the table tightly with both hands, as if he doesn't require any motion at all. It's all perfectly still, but the tension in this hand and in his neck and in the wrinkles above his eye, all these things are telling you that there's lots of potential energy right here without actually having the emotion occur. And that sort of increase in subtlety compared to the earlier version of it is part of his maturing. That is becoming somebody who can tell the story with even less details, even with a greater amount of the picture in darkness, with just a few little highlights picking out what he wants. Here's an example of another later image. This is David and Goliath, where at this stage in his life he's been on the run a lot, and he's in trouble a lot. He's using the occasions that he can stop and make a painting as opportunities to try to redeem himself. While he was away from Rome, he petitioned, sent letters to Rome in an effort to tell the people, his patrons, to see if he could get a pardon. And he would have gotten a pardon had he been able to get back there, but he died on the way. But this is him. This is his self-portrait as Goliath's head that David is holding up. And this disgust that the model has on his face in Goliath is kind of almost his own self-disgust. Okay, let's look back at one of his earlier pictures to show the contrast between Caravaggio, a real Caravaggio, and one of his followers, because he had a lot of followers. One of them was Artemisia Gentileschi, and her father was a Caravaggio follower, and did lots of paintings in the manner of Caravaggio. And he taught his daughter Artemisia, and she made this picture. Is Judith cutting off the head of Holofernes, and it is made sort of in as a response to this one by Caravaggio. And I just to show you the difference. Let's look at these two. You have Judith here, and her maid. Her maid's holding a sack to hold the head in, because she's going to cut off the head of the leader of the opposition army, and take it back to the Israelites to show that she had defeated the enemy. So you have the three figures, big red cloth in the background, big swoop here in her action, and the fact that she's sort of leaning back a little rather than leaning into the process, like she's reluctant to do this. The expression on her face, the psychological image of her sort of reluctance, but still knitted brow, still doing the job, but not relishing in the job. And the maid here, the old maid who's staring, who is relishing the job, and is anxious about it. And the actor playing Holofernes is appears as though he's a sitter, somebody posing for this picture, mugging for the camera, sort of, with this big, mouth open and eyes open wide, and he's holding in his hand apparently a wad of yarn, and that yarn is attached to his neck. So you can imagine how this would be set up if it were a tableau where someone was showing, having actors showing this event. They might want to use yarn to represent blood shooting out of his neck, and maybe even have a fake sword with a notch out of it, so that it looks like it's actually in his neck. So it looks like a tableau of actors performing a scene, and they're doing it, it's gruesome, yes, but when we look at the other one is so much more gruesome that it's almost as if Caravaggio is deliberately holding back. He wants to. He's using his realism to show the actual yarn rather than trying to give the impression of real blood. And also the pose doesn't look like the pose of someone who's performing a violent action. It's somebody who's doing a necessary deed, but is not not really into it. Just that the fact this sweep back and the fact that she's leaning back um, gives the impression that she's only doing this because she has to, but not because she wants to. And so it's this is an interesting psychological thing going on between the three figures, and using the darkness, the having the light play over the different surfaces. Lots of interesting things. Just that the it's like he's holding up the piece of cloth here and creating this line, lining up with this, and that flows into her arm like that. Makes a nice relationship. Lots of lots of interesting things going on here. And look at Artemisia. This is a female artist, and there's not very many female artists. The circumstance of a woman becoming an artist just didn't occur very often because of the apprenticeship process. Required that as a young boys would go to live with the artist and grow up there and get their education there, and uh, it was just part of a system that didn't include women. But on a rare occasions, there would be an artist who has a daughter and teaches, and the artist teaches her daughter. She apprentices essentially with her father, so that she can learn the trade of painting. And in this case, she basically surpassed her father in terms of her skills, and became a name on her own. And she actually became a member of the Painters Guild. Um, we see the same sort of thing with Judith, her arms out, holding the sword. We're pretty much in the same moment of the action. Though in this case, she has altered the poses of everyone so as to change the focus of the action and the meaning of the action. The woman who's the handmaiden is no longer an old lady, but a young woman who is having to physically restrain Holofernes, and she is using much more effort to cut off his head, and she's also put more blood. She's got blood spurting out in all directions and covering the cloth, which he has um, generously rendered, with its surface texture as if it were some sort of silky material, and the way light plays over it. It has gone to lots of effort to render these different textures and colors and tones, and the way light plays over surfaces, and the shining of the sword, and the other stuff going on, the velvet of this blanket on top of him. So she's showing you more stuff than Caravaggio does. Even a little jewelry here, uh, extra different colors and textures of cloth here. But the attitude is much more different, and from Caravaggio, she's the stern expression on her face, the violence going on here is much more. Uh, it has much more action. Much more stuff is going on, and the details and all these other things are sort of, I wouldn't say diluting, but she's not using the same sort of efficient storytelling that Caravaggio using, where she just has he has a few elements, and he's letting just enough of the details of the extraneous details, like this um, dress and the cloth here. They have a purpose in the composition as serving the whole composition. The extra details that are in the uh, Gentileschi are is part of her, like, showing off her painting skills, rather than this is something that the picture needs. She could have had this darkness here, all over this area as well, and just had the spotlight touch the things that needed to be done. But she's doing a different thing here than Caravaggio, and it doesn't have so much of what I think of as the psychological drama. The face, the expression on the face here is kind of neutral, and her face is kind of stern, but it's not particularly uh, illuminating her mind the way Caravaggio's is. Here, this looks like a specific person who is thinking, and this is a specific person who is thinking, so that you have a psychology that's going here, an understanding of the way people are and their motivations and their responses to things, and so that's Caravaggio's working at a different level than his follower, and that's sort of the case with many of his followers. The kind of things that he did with the tenebrism and the realism, others could do, but when it came to the spiritual aspect of his pictures, the psychological aspect of his pictures, those things were unique to Caravaggio, and it wasn't until we get to, say, Rembrandt that we get to someone who's equal or surpasses Caravaggio.